you this seat.
Anyone else?
Tell me, where do they go? These smoke rings I blow each night. What do they do? These circles of blue and white. Why do they seem to picture a dream above? And why do they fade my phantom parade of love? Puff, 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 puff your cares away. Puff, 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 night and day. Blow, blow them into air, silky little rings. Blow, blow them everywhere, give your troubles wings. What do they tell, and what is the spell they cast? Some of them fall and seem to recall the past, but most of them rise away to the skies of blue. Oh, little smoke rings I love, please take me above. Take me with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. My name is Julian, this is my friend Erin, and we are nearing the end of a 8-week national tour. We are literally making the turn towards home tonight, and it's a real pleasure to be able to play at JANM this afternoon, a place that we've been to before and is incredibly important to the research that we do and that our colleagues do. And so what we'll do this afternoon is play a small selection from a much larger project that is No No Boy, this mix of research and songs and stories and visuals that we have concocted. And it'll touch on a few different stories from our research, which is basically trans-Pacific stories, Asian America broadly. And what you'll hear are original songs except for that first one. The reason we start with that first one is because it reminds us of two things that are very important to this project, and that's music, of course, and also place. There's a reason why we go on tour and our research is very land-based. In addition to looking through archives like a normal historian, it's really important for us to travel, to talk to people, to walk the ground where a lot of these histories happened. So, you know, the location of this concert is very important to us today. And that first song we play is a song called Smoke Rings. And it was a song that was popular in the 1930s and 40s. And we play it because there was this moment that we came across in our research that we try to invoke or maybe pay tribute to as we begin our sets. And that was this a talent show we read about in 1943. And this band, this jazz band called the Downbeats, played that song. That was their theme song. And the interesting thing about the Downbeats, which was a pretty good band by all accounts, was where they played that song. They were the band at one of the 10 American concentration camps called Tule Lake in Northern California. So we like to echo that, to bring sound from the past and sing it for you as a way of paying tribute and acknowledging the musicians before us, as well as focusing history down beyond the large numbers of something like Japanese American incarceration of 120,000 people or 10 camps, to a moment, to a song, and to these little individual actions.
So this next song is based on a story that we heard from our friend Alice about her mother Fumie, who was about 15 or 16 years old when those instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry posters went up all up and down the West Coast. And so Fumie and her siblings and her parents were sent to one of these camps. They were sent to Tule Lake, actually. And even though there were dances going on and there were clubs that had formed, and much of the scholarship tells us how much the family structure broke down, Fumie's parents were really, really strict, and she was not allowed to date while she was in camp at all. But of course, young love found a way, as it often does, and Fumie had a secret boyfriend. But the only time that they could show affection for one another was at their job, cleaning dishes after dinner in the mess hall. So they would hold hands underneath the soapy water while they did their job. And Alice told us this story about her mother, and we thought it was this just beautiful example of finding these little moments of joy even behind barbed wire, and thinking about the power of daydreaming in these situations. So this song takes inspiration from that story, and it's called Hart Mountain.
Good years on a mountain, primrose on the sill. Good years on a mountain, in the house that we built. Some star-crossed outlaw love in the movies is cool, but over and over our hearts are wrapped by the rules. Dream, do not do, don't dare drift from the pew. No serpent slain final curtain, no Byronic review. Hush on, tell no one, this one's for you. Hush on and hold it, trust it as true. I was born to western mountains, 3 states from your hills. A long decade onward, a great gap to fill of travel and reference, yet I imagine us still. Old queens in Okinawa, springs of sonnets fulfill. Hush on and hold on, a daydream must do. Hush on and hold it, trust it as true. From my lover's brass bed, I catch alabaster snow, while you cross the Bay Bridge with a boy who's right to boast of his companions' classic beauty, like the agave in bloom, hills of Kurinji flowers where infinity is consumed. Hush on and hold on, like your teenage tattoo, or your beautiful belly, or your perfect crooked tooth. All your language is my language, wet lips in laundry rooms. Hush on and hold on, a daydream must do. Good years on a mountain, with so much love that it spills and runs down Teach me faith over fear. Hear my heart as she thrills and bellows and echoes with unconquerable will. Writing postcards from every province, picking primrose for the sill. Good years on a mountain in the house that we built. Good years on a mountain in the house that we built.
Thank you so much. So as Julian mentioned, we've been on tour for almost 7 weeks at this point, and we've been playing for wonderful audiences all across the country, lots of high schools, middle schools, which always provide an interesting challenge for us. But along the way, because we're also researchers, we try when we can to take the time to talk to folks who've lived through some of the histories that we sing about and write about and think about. And so every time we spend some time with someone who's lived through something like Japanese American incarceration, at the end of our time with them, we always say, you know, we get to share your stories and sing these songs for so many different audiences in so many different contexts across the United States. Is there any message or anything we can pass on your behalf? And every single person to whom we've asked this question has said, please tell my story and don't let this happen again. So this is a message that we carry with us, we think about a lot, but it's also something that you take on as a historian. Whatever kind of gets you into these stories, there's always a sense, I think, of wanting to learn from the past, learn from the mistakes that we've done before. And this can be a challenging task when you see a photograph like the one behind me, which is of folks fleeing Vietnam in the 70s on these rickety fishing boats, hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands in total, fleeing a war that has completely destroyed their home country, crossing the sea, looking for a place of refuge, often being turned away, so that half of these people, half of these boats sank. And these folks are just at the bottom of the South China Sea. But this could be a photograph you'd see today, right? Of folks fleeing places like Syria, other war-torn parts of the world, or the Rohingya people trying to leave Burma where there's a genocide going on right now. So it raises this question for us, especially as we see these echoes of things like immigration bans and names on lists and the US capping the number of refugees we'll take in per year at the lowest ever. It asks the question of what it would mean to look to the past and actually learn something. What would it mean in your daily life to take a lesson from some of what's happened in the past? So this is a question we invite you to think about with us. And this next song is as a reflection on that question. It's the story of one man, a Dr. Tran, who left Vietnam on one of these rickety fishing boats and made it to Vietnam. This song is called Boat People.
40 years ago, the doctor left on a boat, never seen the snow, or felt it in his hand. Sail until you see dry land. I can't get off the news, I can't get off my floor. The good folks go inside when we need you most. What do prayers do behind locked doors? Twan went back to rebuild, only to watch Saigon fall. Now he climbs up Mont Royal, he makes a life in Montreal. Donated winter coats and Barbie dolls. I wrap myself in books, they're talking about this band. I linger on bell hooks, she helps me to understand. Some of this ain't new, cars by car, cargo trucks and cabs, just to shake the cops. But Mom had to stay back, a Chinese safe house and covered tracks, 18 meters long, 200 bodies full, a simple compass and a map from a kid's geography book. Forget Ferdinand, I'm Captain fucking Cook. Bodies bobbing in a rough South China Sea. Came across a pirate ship scavenging. Ripped the doctor from his kids, bleeding. And hours under gun, then tossed into the water. He swam back to his son, held tight to his daughter, drifting through the night. And as the daylight broke, mountain in the dawn off the Malaysian coast, sweet Pulau Bidong. He never cried so hard or so long. I can't get off the news, I can't get off my phone. My mother came here too 40 years ago. So if you see somebody's cold, you give them a cold.
Thank you very much. So for both Erin and I, a lot of this project that comes out of the research that we do at Brown University is very personally driven. It's a lot of family stories that we're trying to find the best we can, which is often a hard task, but filling in stories of people sort of tangential to our families has been an important part of this project. And this next song comes from a conversation with a friend of my mom's. True to that last verse of the song before this, my mom did come to the United States, not 40 years ago, but 50. But we'll keep it 40, and I think she'd prefer it that way. She likes those lyrics. And she was from a place called Saigon. It's not called that on the map anymore. It's called Ho Chi Minh City, and she was raised in a country called South Vietnam, which does not exist anymore. And it's a very interesting set of complications that she's had to negotiate. And for me, growing up in Nashville, Tennessee, it was also very hard to negotiate. It's not like out here in LA where there's lots of Asian people. It's interesting. If you ever want an interesting experiment, go have a kid in Nashville if you're Asian. So a lot of this research came later in life. There weren't community centers, there weren't a lot of stories to be handed down that could be contextualized in a community kind of way. And so it's really been through this project that through research, through talking to friends and families, a lot of stories have come out. And this next song is based on a story I heard from a guy named Robert. Robert lives in Paris. He's a restaurant owner. Robert Vifien, French-Vietnamese guy with heavy emphasis on the French. And he was a high school friend of my mom's. So I was over there visiting family because while my mom came here from Vietnam, all the rest of my family after the fall of Saigon or the reunification, depending on your politics, they all went to France. And one of the reasons my mom and I only speak in French and not Vietnamese or English. It's just a little colonialism 101. So my mom said, go talk to Robert. You want to find out more of what it was like for me to grow up as a high schooler? This is a good friend of mine. So she says, yeah, you'll get a free meal. And I said, okay, that'll be great. And you know, growing up in Nashville, I thought all Vietnamese restaurants were in strip malls in the suburbs. And it was just a nice cheap bowl of soup. This was my understanding of Vietnamese cuisine. And it turned out that Robert had the nicest Vietnamese restaurant in Paris. And so I rolled up in my American tourist outfit of tank tops, shorts, and flip-flops, and had actually invited a friend along too. And it turned out to be like an 8-course meal with champagne and wine. And but luckily, Erin, I had been in a rock band, and Robert loves rock and roll music, and he had our album, so he was just tickled I was there. So I kind of got out of that fashion faux pas. And over these 8 courses, Robert just kept grilling me about what it was like to be, you know, like in a rock and roll band that played all these festivals and put out records and stuff. And I was like, Robert, I kind of came here to ask you what your life was like when you were younger. And so by course 6, we flipped the script a little bit. And Robert said, you know, actually, I mean, I love music too, and I was in a band. When I was when I was with your mom in high school in Saigon, I was just in a rock band. And I had never really understood the Vietnam War or the American War in Southeast Asia in that kind of, I guess, personal way. Because to me, I'd only really learned about the Vietnam War through movies, through Kubrick movies, through Coppola movies, these great American classics. So I really thought the Vietnam War was just a crisis of white masculinity. And I never really learned about people who looked like me and my family. But Robert saying he was in a band really opened things up, because that was something I could relate to. This was a way into history for me. And he was just he's kind of nonchalantly just started telling his stories like, yeah, you know, we would like learn Rolling Stones and Doors songs because the Americans were over and they brought all these records. And, you know, then we'd like fly through the jungle in these helicopters full of like drum sets and amplifiers and prostitutes and drugs. And people would be like shooting at us and stuff. And then we'd like play these rock and roll shows in these clandestine army bases in Vietnam. And it's like, Robert, that's the coolest story I've ever heard in my life. You need to be a little bit more enthusiastic when you tell this. And so that moment really kind of helped my thinking as a historian, to stop thinking about narratives, to stop thinking about these larger, really unrelatable topics. You know, it's great to know that a war happened, but what does that actually mean on the human level? What does mean something is the idea of someone finding utter joy through playing a Jimi Hendrix song in the 1960s and 70s, and to position them in the place of war. So to find that joy, which I know, but while the world is on fire around you, that complication of history is really valuable to think through. And it's that mess of history that a lot of these songs try to leave you with. So this is a pretty seated audience. This next song is a dance song, but you can remain seated. And it's called the Imperial Twist.
Can you give the world a twist? Just by doing the twist. At the moment the bomb went off, they were playing Purple Haze. I met Robert at his restaurant, Septième arrondissement. The doors still echo in the jungle. He said your mother brought back 45s from Paris in 65, and we learned them note for note. Some broken English Rolling Stones, Fenders, Girls and Tone. America provides. Saigon teens. Oh, oh, Saigon teens. Can you give the world a twist just by doing the twist? Can you save the world with acid rock? I didn't know my mother's maiden name. That time in Texas when we was detained. And I've been back to old Saigon, but how much of you is lost when they change your name? Oh, oh, Saigon teens. Oh, 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 Saigon teens. Oh, 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 Saigon teens. Oh, 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 Saigon teens. And it was half a world away. The band got back on stage for decades to the day. Purple haze.
Thank you very much. This project is firmly planted in collaboration. I think if it, so this is actually my dissertation at Brown. And if it's trying to make an intervention at all for folks like Erin and I, our generation of academics, it's to collaborate more. And that's what this project really tries to exemplify, to get rid of the idea of sole authorship, or making a name, or carving out space and working together to try to tell stories, to try to do something with all this privilege and time we have to just research and read and hopefully make things that can affect people in some way. And this next song is just that. It's a collaboration. This song wouldn't have existed without a student of mine named Nicolina Mao. She's a Cambodian American student and took a class I taught called No No Boy at Brown. Very uncreative when it comes to naming my stuff. And one day I walked in to class and she was talking to Madhavan, her friend, who's also Cambodian American. And Nicolina said, yeah, I was talking to my dad last night on the phone and I was speaking in my best Camerican. And I'd never heard that word before. And one, I thought, oh, that'd be a cool song title. File it away. And then I thought, oh, what does that mean? And so I asked Nicolina and Madhavan what Camerican means, and Madhavan kind of looked at me like I was an idiot, and she said, well, it's like our Spanglish. It's like the Khmer language mixed with English. It's Camerican. And I said, oh, maybe I'll write a song called Camerica. And they took me very seriously because as 3 weeks before the semester ended, they sort of cornered me in a hallway. They're both about 5'2". They're kind of, have you written Camerica yet? And I asked them if they'd done their finals yet. And so we made a trade. And I said, give me something to write about, because the whole process of teaching this class was really important because it started with these foundational things that I study, like Japanese American history, Chinese American immigration history, the Vietnam War. But even as a Vietnamese person, I knew very little about these countries right next door, like Laos and Cambodia. And even within Asian American studies, or the Asian American community, we often forget folks from South Asia or Southeast Asia. We often overlook the fact that in our narratives dominated by Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, folks in the Cambodian diaspora are oftentimes the worst off, economically speaking, of anyone in the United States. And there's a really large population in Providence where we live. So this class that I was teaching was a really wonderful way for Madhavan and Nicolina to help me sort of steer our knowledge and expand it. And so for this song, Nicolina gave us this portfolio of paintings. Paintings of sunsets at the Angkor Wat temples, the great symbol of Cambodia, this country that had been as greatly and harmfully affected by the U.S. occupation and bombings in Southeast Asia. And then when the United States leaves in this power vacuum, this horrible, catastrophic historical event of the Khmer Rouge taking power takes place, where a quarter of the population is just massacred. People who aren't necessarily with an agrarian Marxist program, people who are educated, people who are artists, dancers, are just killed, exterminated in these camps. And this is a history I knew very little about, and this was a history that Nicolina's father lived through. And besides these paintings, which this is what he paints, this is what he remembers, or wants to remember, of this country he can never go back to, Nicolina also recorded this 30-minute phone interview. And it's just this really beautiful conversation of a daughter trying to take on the impossible task of understanding what a family member who went through something like this, trying to reclaim a history that's impossible to actually hold on to see the world through her father's eyes. So I just sat with this conversation and these paintings and wrote this song for Nicolina and her dad. It's called Comerica. Yeah. Some nights I'm a tourist to my kind. Landscape caught within a frame, a glimpse of another side. Call you in my best American painter. Pick up your round brush and fill the details in. Be my eyes, be my eyes. Cracked paint, a place enchanted, the colors of your life. Sunsets playing on the temple, and you who survived. Be my eyes, be my eyes. Some kids move because their parents take new jobs. Some kids move because of napalm. Cracked paint, a place enchanted, the colors of your life. See him bathed in golden umber and palm trees climb so high. Sunsets playing on the temple, and you who survive. Be my eyes, Father, be my eyes, be my eyes, Father, be my eyes, be my eyes, Father, be my eyes. I can play the old music, we can dance to all the old songs, but I'll never walk with you through it. What a cruel, cruel task to belong. Yeah, you said the moon's not sitting right when you wanted to marry Mom. Be my eyes, Father, be my eyes, be my eyes, Father, be my eyes, be my eyes, Father, ooh, be my eyes.
Thank you so much. So we're going to move back into a suite of songs that focus on our research and the histories of Japanese American incarceration. So this is a photograph of my grandfather when he was a teenager, and I love this photograph because it's just so cool looking. But I often think that my grandfather would be horrified that we show it on large screens like this to audiences of strangers. But not that you're strangers, but yeah, so this next song is kind of an intervention, I guess, into how we think about histories and thinking about, you know, these stories of Japanese American incarceration that are so, you know, important and undertold in so many ways, but that there's also histories before that. There were Japanese Americans in the United States, there were Asian Americans in the United States before, despite these laws put in place like the Chinese Exclusion Act and then the 1924 Immigration Act that attempted to just completely exclude Asians from the United States. There were folks here. There were folks carving out communities and spaces for themselves, even if we don't often think about them that way. And so this next song is basically a backyard barbecue song. It's just about, you know, enjoying some time in the summertime outside. But the photographs that we use are from the 20s and 30s, and they're of Japanese Americans having picnics. And it's this sort of way of inserting into this story that's so familiar to so many of us, these characters that we don't often think in those situations. So this song is called Disposable Youth.
You might have to, yeah.
Disposable you, disposable me, disposable hearts, indestructible teens, a grin on the grass, Polish horseshoes and white trash croquet from your lawn chair rain, Coleman cooler of ice, bobbing for PBR, Modelo's light-headed, man, she's off the charts, undeniable parts, sharp with dark eyes and runner's legs, a mouth like New Year's Day. Not a moment to waste, leave that for the food. It's life that we taste, it's life that tastes good. Disposable you, irrepressible hands long his waist. God, this band is great. Disposable you, caught like fireflies in this mason jar afternoon, or last bite out of mold peach pie. Disposable you, disposable me, fearless child rolling up her sleeve.
So this next song we're gonna do, we often get asked why we're called No No Boy, and we'll let you ask that question during the Q&A if you want. But this next song was written and dedicated to a guy who wrote a novel called No No Boy, a guy named John Okada. Really kind of the first Asian American classic in literature, and it's this wonderful story of this kid Ichiro who comes back from federal prison. He was in one of the Japanese American incarceration camps, but he was a draft resistor, so even beyond the kind of sentence for that whole community of being in these camps, he, like many other men, served time in federal prison. And when he comes back to Seattle, he's completely shunned by the Japanese American community, spit on, literally. And Okada captures this torn-intuitedness, which is more of a universal than specific to any immigrant community. This feeling I felt, that many people I think have felt, of mixed backgrounds one way or another, being caught in between politics, being caught in between countries, feelings. And Okada does this wonderful work. And so this next song is called Pacific Fog. Let's see if this is working. No. And it's just about that book, that torn-intuitedness, and it's for John Okada. And it goes like this.
Take me out dancing under the stars. Oh, Japanese parts, American wheels, take you further than far. So wild, entangled in your sheets. On every page I thought, that's me. Oh, love of mine, take me out swimming in Pacific Fog. Mexican snow, they both get you lost. Have you ever seen a child tangled in her sheets? Have you ever thought, that's me? Ichiro, bury your mother, your runaway thoughts. Oh, no, no, boy, poor John Okada, wrapped in Pacific fog.
Thank you so much. So my grandparents were Nisei. They were second generation Japanese Americans. And my grandfather, Chikara Aoyama, was born on a pineapple plantation on Maui. And when he was 17, he left Maui to go work as a carpenter at Pearl Harbor, the military base on the island of Oahu. So on December 7th of 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, it was a Sunday, actually, so my grandfather was not at work. But as soon as Japanese Americans were again allowed to enlist in the military, he joined the 442nd, the segregated all-Japanese American unit in the military that to this day remains the most highly decorated combat unit for its size and length of service. They were nicknamed the Purple Heart Battalion. And so my grandfather served in North Africa and Italy. He was wounded in Briere, France, and came back to the US to recuperate. And so I grew up knowing a little bit about this story, knowing about the 442nd, knowing a little bit about my grandfather's time, but we never really filled in the details. So when he passed away, we found his Purple Heart and all of his medals and the piece of shrapnel that they dug out of his stomach in an envelope in his sock drawer, which was kind of a funny moment, a bittersweet moment, because this was very typical of my grandfather. He was a very kind of quiet, stoic, humble man with very strict rules about eating chips and salsa, which involved no double dipping, very strictly. But you know, he never talked about this time. I remember when he was at our house once, he watched one of the documentaries about the 442nd, and for some reason we all sat behind him. So my memory is watching this movie through the kind of thin frame of my grandfather's shoulders, sitting in front of us, and afterwards he just turned around and said, "I remember that," and that was it. And so his name is out on the monument just behind us. But it doesn't fill in the details, right? I can trace where he was during the war. I can, know a little bit about where he lived when he came back, but it doesn't talk about, the pain that he felt, both being wounded but coming back to the United States and being unsure of his position, how he would be perceived within the United States. And so while we celebrate this legacy of the 442nd, these men who enlisted from Hawaii, but many also from within these concentration camps to prove literally with their blood, their Americanism, their loyalty, their patriotism, that narrative runs the risk also of covering over other important histories that don't get told, that don't fit with this kind of triumphalist narrative of the 442nd. And that's a little bit about what this next song is about.
So we think of someone like Tomoki Ogata, whose name really exists only in the next song that you're going to hear. It's not memorialized, but he was a Issei, first-generation immigrant, like so many other folks, putting down roots of a community that many of you are a part of today. But Tomoki was lost, and the only reason we know his name is because as researchers were digging through an archive and we found an article from the camp in southeast Colorado from the newspaper they would publish a few times a week. And this headline said, 61-year-old Issei bachelor hangs self. And below that said, body not found for 3 weeks. And so the story of Tomoki Ogata is an immigrant story. It's an American story. And it's an important one for us to speak. Because there was a lot of people in camp that did not survive. We're talking to a Buddhist minister in Chicago, and after hearing this song that we're about to play, he said, "I'm glad you did, because it's important for us to remember that not everyone was a survivor." And Tomoki Ogata was 61, so he was probably 59 or 60 when he was sent off to southeast Colorado. He had come over decades earlier trying to make a life. Maybe like my mom, he didn't want to come to the United States, but found himself in a position where he needed the opportunity to go somewhere else. We don't know much about his life other than this death notice, really. But that moment of that interval of time, to think about Tomoki taking a rope, walking from his barrack that he shared with 4 other guys, into this cramped space smaller than this stage, taking a rope and walking outside the barbed wire 3 miles north of camp along the Arkansas River in southeast Colorado, finding a tree in that part of the world, probably a cottonwood, that could support his weight, that process that he's going through. And then those 3 weeks, because a lot of the songs we sing are from people who are alive to give us oral histories, or who want to speak about this time in their life. And that necessarily pushes the way we tell this story and many other stories. And so to put Tomoki in this conversation is very important with us, because while his body is hanging out there in the Colorado breeze, and you can hear the river in the background, like a pendulum counting time, there's dances happening. Bands are playing. People are falling in love, holding hands beneath soapy water. This is the mess of history. This is that juxtaposition of a swinging body decaying and bloating. This horrible thing to think about, while survival is happening for other people. And for us, this is the reckoning of what we try to do, I think, as historians. So this next song has a very graphic image. Feel free to not look at the screen for this one. And it's for Tomoki, some other folks, and it's called Only What You Can Carry. I wrote to the poet Brandon Shimoda about the ones we leave behind, alone on the plains, lost to muted refrains in dust devil sagebrush shrines. Go walk through that museum out in Los Angeles, floating past history without a stumble or trip. I see a Boy Scout bass drum and a "we got through this" narrative realized from an exhibition script. Only what you can carry. Take only what you can carry. But I think of Tomoki Ogata picking out a tree, and I think of Mr. Harada hanging from a barrack beam. But take only what you can carry. I was talking to my friend Erin Aoyama about her granddad's Purple Heart, catching a bullet, proving some metal, and saving our world from falling apart. Then my ears caught the roar of 1,000 men or more, marching with the Hoshidan. They sang those Issei songs you don't hear anymore, scraped from loyal American tongues. Only what you can carry. Take only what you can carry. And I think of Frances Okasaki. When did her daughters realize she was gone? And I think of John Yoshida laying down on a railroad track to join his mom. But take only what you can carry. Only what you can carry. I will but ask you one question, simple and true, and there is no right answer I expect back from you. But when we remember, really what do we do? Who do we save and who do we lose? I think of those granddads in the Ford 42, and their names held forever in red, white, and blue, but also scratched out in some reds, whites, and blues. There's Frances Okasaki, and there's poor John Yoshida, and there's Mr. Harada.
and Tomoki Ogata. So take only what you can carry, only what you can carry. Take only what you can carry, but carry some of these names if you could.
Thank you so much. So we're going to play 2 more songs for you. We used to end with that last one, and while it's central to our project, it's really a bummer. So we will not leave you with that note, though it's there. So this next song is about a place. It's about a place called Hart Mountain, which was one of the 10 concentration camps that incarcerated 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry. This one was in the northwest corner of the state of Wyoming, between Cody and Powell, about 60 miles outside of Yellowstone. And it's where my grandmother, Misaha Takayama, and her older brother Kimio and their parents were incarcerated for about a year during World War II. So I have a lot of memories of my grandmother, we called her Gra, from growing up. My siblings and I were her only grandchildren, so she's the one who taught me how to use chopsticks, and she knit most of the sweaters I wore as a kid growing up. But she never talked about her time at Hart Mountain, as far as I know, not to my dad or his brother. And she passed away right before I started 4th grade. So it was also not something that I, as an 8 or 9-year-old, really had the questions to ask her about. And so working on this project and looking into this history so deeply can be really frustrating and really sad to not be able to ask the questions I now have of the one person that I really want to talk to about it. But this silence is also something that I have been coming to terms with. I will make that a continual process of understanding that when you're studying these moments in history that are filled with trauma and violence and war and displacement, this silence is a really important part of the story. And so while we try when we can to give voice to that silence, it's also important to lean into it and leave it where it is and kind of weave it into the stories that we tell and the songs that we sing, as a way of honoring this silence of my grandmother, of so many grandmothers, and so many of those Nisei and folks who lived through these unimaginable histories. And so this next song tries to do that work of honoring the silences, but pairs it with also the work of historians, which is learning as much as you can about a place and the lives that were lived there, and then building a world, kind of creating a story based on what you know. And so this song is about the root cellar, which was built at Hart Mountain by the Japanese Americans incarcerated there, a place where we know teenagers would sneak out around the barbed wire to go hang out in the root cellar just to get away from their lives in camp for a little bit. So this is a song about 2 teenagers walking past the ice skating pond, past the old men singing in the shower, through a cut in the wire, to just dance in the root cellar and find a little bit of joy in a really dark time. So this song is called 2 Candles in the Dark.
Don't it feel like a movie, teaching this girl how to waltz? Left feet she might have 3, but she sure feels nice in my arms. Old folks sing an old song, playing the agreed upon key. My eyes are stuck on her, her eyes don't leave her feet. All this girl, no class ring, maybe this is more than a lark. Brown boots, a dirt floor, we're dancing like 2 candles in the dark. Pretty outlaw calls a 1/4 like knuckles on a barrack door. She got a brother down in Topaz, I saw that name once in a jewelry store. Wind around past the skaters and punk, just looking for a cut in the wire. She got a key to the cellar door, I don't ask questions, man, just stand there inspired. All this why I miss the garden at the Golden Gate Park. Young blood and old songs, we're dancing like two candles in the dark. It's like some movie, and she's just tailor-made for the part. Lamps licking the roof beam, she's got good looking down to an art. Hear the old folks sing them old songs, the background just fades away. Our coffee can fire's almost gone. She says, I gotta get out of this place. All this, girl, a pinpoint. The moment you feel a spark. Brown boots, a dirt floor. We're dancing like two candles in the dark. We're dancing like two candles in the dark. Dancing like two candles in the dark.
Thank you very much. I'm going to play one more song and then we'll flip on the lights. And if you need to leave, feel free. But we're going to, one of the reasons why we go on tour is to have conversations, to take questions if we can answer anything. This is a more knowledgeable audience than normal, than say when we're out in the middle of Wisconsin or Wyoming. But we appreciate any stories that you have for us or any questions, any conversation we can have. It's a real big part of our research and why we go on tour. And we're gonna end with a song that's about a place. An imaginary place called Little Saigon, and I'm well aware there are actual Little Saigons. I was raised in Nashville, but I've traveled since. But there's not a Little Saigon like the one in this song, and that's one of the wonderful things about songwriting or any art. You can imagine places where you don't. Imagine places where you might fit in better than the actual world that you live in. So this kind of comes from what it was like to grow up in Nashville, to only really have my brother and my mom around, and then once a week I'd go see Lily. I don't know if you guys know Lily. Her mom owned the Chinese grocery in Nashville, and so you don't know her? Okay.
She hasn't made it out here.
I haven't seen her in a while, so hoping you could give her my best. But we used to climb on the rice bags for like half an hour each week when my mom would buy crabs and other stuff at the Chinese grocery. So that was my Asian American community. And so this is a song that, you know, it's like a pastoral kind of thing. Like it's an imagining of a place that is just a little easier to fit into for a 12-year-old Vietnamese kid in Nashville. It's called Little Saigon. Like I said, it's not about actual Little Saigons, which, to at least in my opinion, are sort of like giant malls with great food and very confused politics. This is a simple place. And we thank you very much, and look forward to talking with you after.
I heard about a place called Little Saigon, where everybody's got my face, so mine won't have to grow so long. Palm trees, a terrace, cedar cafe, where I belong. Oh, I think I'd like to go to this place, Little Saigon. One day I'm gonna go to a place called Little Saigon. Buy shoes in a little shop and silk from Vietnam. Take lessons on the dan bao and play an old folk song. Yes, I think I'd like to go to this place, Little Saigon. Je vais aller à Little Saigon. J'enverrai une lettre en français à ma maman. C'est pas Saigon, maman, mais je serai content longtemps. Oh, un jour je voudrais aller à Little Saigon. One day I'm gonna go to a place called Little Saigon and listen to the CBC band loud with my headphones on. Walk around the indoor mall where the language sounds like song. Yes, I think I'd like to go to this place, Little Saigon. Oh, I think I'd like to go to this place, Little Saigon.
It's been an amazing project so far. Just writing the songs and having Erin spearhead a lot of the educational outreach that we do. Just really amazing kind of like daily processes of just like putting together a set to play for you and talking through what stories we're going to tell and what we're thinking. Mm-hmm. So it's really, what's next?
Albuquerque.
Albuquerque.
Yeah, but if you have friends, you know, who you think might be interested in what we're doing, send them to our shows. They're usually, you know, free and totally open to the public. Mm-hmm. But it's really just trying to reach people where and when we can, which is part of really why we go on tour and why it's just awesome to have audiences that show up.
And directing people to the website, you know, just a lot of, you know, we can only play so many shows, and Erin's got to go back to class. I have to finish up my dissertation, so we can't really tour for a while like this, like we have for the last 8 weeks. We're really just trying to play for as many folks and teach as many students as possible. But you know, there's an album that is out there in the ether that anyone can download and listen to, and directing people towards those songs is, I think, the reason why there is that part of the project, because we want to share the histories that we study, these stories that we find very relevant to what's going on today. Even more, I think, important to Erin and I than playing on the West Coast, or we get asked to play a lot of like Chinatown event centers and things like that. We consider those more of the home team kind of shows. The reason why we play kind of folk musical is in large part, and the reason why we're not lecturing or making arguments is so we can go to places like Nashville, or we can go to, you know, the middle of Wyoming or Ohio or whatever, to have these conversations without really pushing our politics, which are certainly in the songs. So in Nashville, it was a good reception. I remember there's a lot of the like really like basically like a lot of the white ladies who raised me were there, who were very conservative Republican, and I think there was some confusion as to like that I was Asian to begin with. And a lot of these things that I think people out here on the West Coast in these communities or in more blue states would take for granted, but it's having a lot of conversations from the bottom level.
Yeah, and I think when we do play for the non-home team crowds, a lot of what's really meaningful is that folks will come up to us afterwards and they've made their own connections into the stories that we've told or the histories we've gone over. It's like this, you know, my mother was Jewish, and so this made me think of this story or this piece. And I think making those connections is really significant for us and important that, you know, these are stories from our own family backgrounds, from our research, but we think they're relevant beyond just even those histories. And so having people make their own connections in is really important as well.
Yeah, so it's been good. We've gotten a few like rogue, weird questions and one really insensitive question when we were in Cheyenne that were kind of confrontational, but for the most part, it's been just really positive. Even in places that might seem foreign, like Nashville.
I have a question. I loved your show and your songs because you covered the whole story, the whole story. All right, but I'm really curious as to why and who titled it "No No Boy."
I titled it, but Erin's going to answer this question. She's a better speaker than I am.
Oh, wow, okay. So I think there's a couple of layers to why we chose the name No No Boy. So on one level, it's sort of honoring that novel by John Okada, written in 1957, kind of one of the first great Asian American novels, and one that I didn't know existed until my junior year of college. So sometimes we hope that people will go home and Google No No Boy trying to find us, not find us, but buy the book instead.
Which has happened.
Which has happened. A couple of my parents' friends, actually. But also I think part of the reason behind titling it No No Boy, or why we've kind of stood behind that title, is that we're trying to gesture towards other histories, other stories that we don't hear as much. So I grew up in Connecticut. We learned about the American Revolution probably 5 or 6 times by the time I graduated high school, but we never made it to World War II. We never got to that part of American history. And so obviously we didn't learn about Japanese American incarceration. We didn't learn about the 442nd. We didn't learn about the No-No Boys. These men and women who said no and no to 2 questions on that loyalty questionnaire in 1943, asking folks, will you serve on combat duty in the United States military wherever ordered, and will you forswear allegiance to the Emperor of Japan? Most people, most Japanese Americans and Japanese folks in these camps said yes and yes to those questions, but some people, for a variety of reasons, said no. Whether it was they didn't want to serve in the military until they were released from camp and their citizenship rights were restored to them. Some folks were confused, wanted to keep their families together. Others were the Issei, the first generation of Japanese immigrants to the US, who were not allowed to become naturalized American citizens at all. And so giving up their citizenship to Japan would have left them stateless, already within this very liminal space of the camps. And so this narrative of the No-No Boys, which is not a narrative but a mess of all of these different stories and characters and people, is something that if you learn about Japanese American incarceration, you don't hear those names, you don't hear those people, you don't hear those stories. And so part of us naming this project that is to gesture towards the fact that we're not telling a complete story, we're not telling a complete narrative. There's all of these other histories. The more that you dig in, that you find, that you uncover, that challenge, the one story you maybe got in a textbook. So when we go and talk to students, a lot of the time, we're hoping that some of this content sticks to them. It's the, the spaghetti method of just throwing it at them and hoping something sticks, but trying to plant this idea of history as just a collection of stories. It's not the open and closed narrative that you read in a textbook, but it's all of these, different people trying to make their way through these much larger histories and things going on. And so sometimes we hope the name sort of gestures towards that, just towards what else is there below the maybe one story that you hear in class.
At any rate, I want to ask for yourselves, doing this research and looking into your own family past, what story did you come across, each of you, that had a real impact, whether it was through surprise or just something that you came across that really was a nice moment for each of you?
I can go first. You might be processing this answer still. So there's this moment I was talking to my aunt and my mom a lot more, who were young women during the war, when they both respectively kind of left Vietnam at different times, and learning just more about that moment. I always think of history as like I said, from moments outwards. And those moments of departure, whether it's my mom leaving right after the Tet Offensive when she watches her grandfather be assassinated by a grenade in their house, and then basically takes a very good opportunity to go on a student visa to the United States in the late 60s. Or my aunt, who had to stay for the fall of Saigon and watch the tanks roll down the street and watch the soldiers, the South Vietnamese soldiers, strip their uniforms so they wouldn't be found out and put in re-education camps or killed. And then I think, maybe not the most surprising, but the most complex moment that I think I've found in my family history is my mom telling me, I knew that my family weren't boat people and they got out through this very precarious overland route. They had a flight waiting for them that would take them to Paris from Bangkok, but they had to get across Cambodia first on foot. And my mom told me the story of in Bangkok, once they made it, my grandmother, my Bung Wai, it was like the only time she got drunk in her life. It's a good time to get drunk, I think, on the precipice of like leaving. And I've thought a lot and written a song about that moment of my grandmother on a Bangkok hotel balcony drinking champagne and looking out and thinking this might be the last time I ever see this continent. And that moment was very loaded and complex and something we work through every time we sing that song or have this discussion. So I think that's probably the moment for me, my mom telling me that story of my Bung Wai on the balcony.
I think some of the most meaningful moments on tour have been when we've played songs for our family, whether it's our parents or when we played for Julian's mom in Portland. Her question was, did you really show up at Robert's restaurant in flip-flops? And that's like my favorite one. She was horrified.
She's very culturally Parisian.
She's very classy. But yeah, having those moments and getting to share, you know, these questions, and really this has been a meaningful project to work through with my dad and my siblings. But yesterday, so my dad grew up in Gardena, not too far from here, and there's still a lot of family around. I have two cousins here today. But we went down to Gardena yesterday to have lunch with my uncle, or my great uncle, my grandfather's little brother. And it was great. He makes ukuleles and guitars, and so we had a lot to talk about with him. And I mentioned to him that I was staying in this hotel that looked out at the Go for Broke monument. We were staying at the Miyako Hotel, so I could see it from my window. And I was just sort of making conversation, and he said to me, oh, well, your grandfather's name isn't on there. And I said, yes, it is. I've seen it. I know that it's there. And he was really surprised because that story I told about finding my grandfather's medals in an envelope in his sock drawer, I always thought of as this funny, like, humble piece of my grandfather, which is definitely true. But my uncle basically explained to us that from his perspective as my grandfather's little brother, my grandfather's time in the 442nd was so awful and so horrible that he could never talk about it. And I've heard from my dad and my grandmother that, you know, he had nightmares for years after he came back. But to hear my uncle say that he was surprised that my grandfather's name was even on the monument was really surprising. And we laughed when you asked that question because it has made the stories that we tell a lot more real for me in the last literally 24 hours of just imagining my grandfather coming back to the United States after, you know, being so horribly wounded. He'd be about my age, and just being so alone and feeling so in pain physically and emotionally and otherwise. And so it's made some of these stories a lot harder to tell, I think, and thinking about all the reasons why my grandparents never talked about this time in their lives. So I don't know if that's been a nice moment, but I think it's been a really important one to really kind of reckon with my own family history and the ways that I knew my grandparents, which were obviously, as their grandchildren, these like really beautiful relationships that I had with them, but also trying to confront more honestly the lives that they lived before, which is so much of this project. But I think having some of those details filled in by my uncle, who has his own perspective on things too, has been a really interesting 24 hours of processing. So check back, maybe I'll have different thoughts in a week, but yeah.
Did you get started
How did we get started on this project?
Origin story.
Erin can give you her origin story. She comes in a few episodes into the comic book.
Make it better.
Makes it better. She's my superpower.
Okay.
Or,
Okay, that's fine.
You're the radioactive spider that
Yeah,
bites
yeah,
me.
okay.
So I actually went to Brown for grad school as an ethnomusicologist, and I was very happy before this project. And I actually went to write a dissertation about street musicians. My entire first summer of grad school was spent traipsing through Paris and Berlin and Milan and Montpellier, just playing music in the sunshine and talking to other street musicians and jugglers and acrobats, and it was the best summer of my life. And then something changed around fall of 2016, about this time in 2016. That was pretty upsetting. Once Trump took office, Japanese incarceration was invoked. It had been thrown around a lot, actually, just from both sides, the left and the right. And Erin likes to say, without too much thinking about what that history actually means and without slowing down. It's just kind of thrown around. But Trump's person in the administration, invokes it to like kind of give precedent for a Muslim ban. And I'd been working on this paper I started 3-4 years earlier when I was living in Wyoming, and sort of made my own personal pilgrimage to these sites of Asian American history, to Rock Springs where 28 Chinese miners were massacred in 1885, and of course to Hart Mountain, where the camp that Erin's grandma was in. The site still exists. And I saw this picture when I was there going through the museum of a jazz band. And as a musician, someone who actually went to a jazz college, I'd never heard about Asian Americans playing jazz or anything but violin or piano, really. I had to find out who these people were. I had to find out the story of this band behind barbed wire. It was so incredible to me. It really spoke. This made history come alive, and I did that. And so I kind of had talked to people who were still alive, who were musicians in the camp, and sort of became friends with all these people who had been through camp. So it became a very personal thing to me. And so when it was invoked, I thought I should really do this project for my dissertation. I just want to do something that just is more meaningful. I feel very upset right now, and maybe this will help me for the rest of grad school. So I just do a complete shift. And I remember going to a conference to present a paper I'd written on the jazz bands in the camps. And I was looking out at the audience. There was like 10 people there.
Which is pretty good for a conference.
It's pretty good, really good for a conference. And I was just thinking, like, I used to be in a band. I used to be able to play for hundreds of people and just like sing songs, and I wish I could tell them this story. And so I went back home over Christmas break with all of this in mind, and I put on my headphones to do some transcription work of all these oral histories I'd collected of people who had lived through these different Asian American experiences. So the voices of people who had been in the camps, who had been refugees, who had come over, I was just, head in my headphones, was typing out their words to use to tell stories, and I had my guitar right next to me. And I just started strumming while these voices were in my head, and I came back to Brown with about 12 songs after that winter break. And so that was kind of the start of this project.
Yeah, and I started grad school in 2017 and did not intend to join a band. But that's been a cool development. So yeah, Julian and I actually first met as part of this mobile workshop that our friend Nicole had organized. That was basically 8 grad students, 8 PhD students, who were studying Asian American history, specifically Japanese American incarceration, but from a bunch of different departments, so a bunch of different points of view. And we did a road trip up the length of the exclusion zone. So we started in Phoenix, Arizona, and then made our way all the way up to Bainbridge Island. And we brought a musician along with us, or he joined somehow. And about halfway through the trip, we ran out of money. And so this musician, who's a guy named Kishibashi, said, I have a pretty big fan base in Portland, Oregon, so I'll put on a benefit concert, because it was kind of his fault that we had run out of money. And just true. He also brought a filmmaker along, so we had to rent a bigger car. So that's what happened. And so he said to Julian, because we kind of been playing music in all these different spaces along the way, he said, Julian, do you want to open for me? And Julian knew that I was a singer, and so asked if I wanted to sing harmony on some of those songs. And so in about a week, we learned 8 songs together or so, and did a concert in August of 2017. And then since then, this has grown to the point where I dropped out of school for a semester to go on tour, which was unexpected, but one of the main impetuses for me going to grad school was trying to think about how we teach history and how there are so many stories left out, not just Japanese American incarceration, which obviously is really close to my heart, but so many students who don't see themselves reflected in their history classes and find history really boring and all of these things. And so this project has been a really wonderful answer to some of those questions of, how can we shift the way that we think about history methodologically, and how do we bring art into the classroom and storytelling and all of this stuff. So that's how a year and a half later, we're here with some, bumps along the way. But how do we identify as Asian American today ourselves? Ooh, that's an interesting question.
Not in the same way a lot of our friends on the West Coast do, or who grew up in largely Asian communities. We're also very different. We come from two historically different populations as well, and we're both mixed. You can't say Hapa at Brown, so I guess you can't hear since there's an exhibit.
We're free.
And I think a part of this project is exploring Asian America in a broader way than has been defined previously in sort of Asian American studies by people like our advisors, people who have been part of this sort of activist academic community for a long time, people who grew up largely on the West Coast or in New York, or these pockets of Asian Americanness, and sort of expanding that to, kids in Middle America, and sort of saying growing up in the South listening to country music is just as much of an Asian American experience as anywhere else. I don't know if
I think a big part of this tour has been kind of trying to answer that question in some ways, and figuring out, growing up being Japanese American meant that no one could ever pronounce my last name correctly. And so now that's evolved and has a lot more, I think, more of a richer history behind it. Still hard sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think you're practicing. For both of us, coming to terms with what it means to be half Japanese, half Irish, and half Vietnamese, half Swedish, Italian, whatever is mixed in there, and coming to terms with that on our own as kind of an individual identity that we're still working on.
Yeah, I think just being more accepting of because it was a lot of moments of non-acceptance for ourselves, us not accepting ourselves growing up because of these mixed identities, or for me growing up in the 90s in Tennessee, a lot of outright racism. Towards my mom, towards me, getting the shit kicked out of you sometimes, just because of who you are. So you want to deny that, especially if you're a halvesy kid. You want to lean into the white part. And so it's I think a lot of this, that last song, is more an imagining of just regardless of what you are, don't even think about the Asian part or the race part, just be okay. And you are okay. And that's kind of, I think, what a lot of this project has done. For me, anyways.
What's our favorite song and why, out of the songs we sing?
Who's your favorite song?
I have an answer. Yeah. My favorite is Two Candles in the Dark. And why? I think I love the video that goes along with it. I love seeing that color footage from the camp, and that the young woman ice skating in the red sweater is really beautiful. And I think it also, I just love this kind of story around it, or how I think about this song, and that it makes me think of my grandma, but it also makes me think of, all these other characters filling in some of that history. And it's also fun to sing. So I like that.
I think today my favorite song from this project is a song called Where the Sand Creek Meets the Arkansas River. It's a song we've actually never performed it yet, but we both like singing it a lot.
We sing it in the car.
Yeah. When there's 60 songs, you can only do so much of each concert or each album, but it'll probably go on the next album we're going to record. And the reason I really like it is because it takes it's overlaps history. So it takes these two bodies of water, the Arkansas River and the Sand Creek. The Arkansas River, like I said, that's where this guy Tomoki killed himself. and it kind of takes that ghost and it puts it against this horrible massacre that happened when the U.S. cavalry went and killed and slaughtered all these Native Americans, which is called the Sand Creek Massacre. And those places are only a 45-minute car ride from each other. The camp, the Japanese American incarceration camp at Amache, and then also where the Sand Creek Massacre was. So if you're ever in that part of the world, visiting those sites in the same day and thinking about the land before these camps, like the native dispossession of these places, the horrible genocide of Native Americans on all of this land, and then also the people who came after, like the homesteaders who moved into these places. I really like that song because it makes you reckon with those timelines at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I really like as a songwriter that you can't do as like just writing a school paper. You can sort of bring characters together and put them in conversation to maybe expand our idea of history. So I really like that one. And maybe we'll play it next time.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Maybe a couple more questions? Sure,
Yes.
up there.
Thank you so much. That was just so brilliant. I really loved your show. This is more an observation.
Okay.
Seems like this very interesting Asian American history/music is coming from places like Kishibashi. Is he in Tennessee too?
He's in Georgia.
Georgia, and then is the rapper George Yamazawa?
He's in North Carolina?
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
so I just find all your work so stimulating and a different point of view than from us from the West Coast. And so I didn't know if you have put any thought about that, and as well as have you reached out to any musicians like in California or in New York and have, just to create more of a national network of what you all are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've joked about this a lot. Starting on that road trip, there was an interesting mix of what we call East Coast / Southeast Asians. No, that's confusing. Southeastern
Southern.
United States, Southern, yeah. Southern Asian Americans, and then versus the West Coast Asians. And it was kind of a joke at first, but it is a really interesting, perspective to come from. Not that there isn't incredible art and activism coming from folks on the West Coast, but when you're kind of outside of these communities and you don't have access to them in the same way, I don't know, I think it gives you a lot of different things to think about. So we're definitely kind of coming from that outside looking in a little bit, trying to meddle through what it means to be Vietnamese American or Japanese American without kind of a community to look at and model after, per se. As far as musicians, I think we've managed to collaborate almost accidentally with a lot of Asian American musicians doing really different projects. We used to tour around with Kishibashi quite a bit. And this other group called Takanobu that's also based out of Atlanta. Yeah. I don't know. It's all happening over there.
Georgia Asians are strong with the music. And so we try to, whenever we can, have a taiko group open for us. At Brown, the school taiko group performed at our concert. In Chicago, we performed with one of the taiko groups there 3 times. And at the Portland Buddhist Temple, their taiko group opened the most recent show we did on this tour. So we really like that. We really like those kind of collaborations. But Erin, I think we have friends. We play a lot of festivals or concerts where I think there's more. I don't know how they would define themselves or what the boundaries are, but the kind of Asian American activist community. But we're not really a part of that. Not because we don't want to be, I guess, but just we live far away.
And we're technically in school.
Yeah.
This is our first show, as No Boy in Los Angeles. Well, actually last night we had a show in Los Angeles.
Yeah, my parents met in San Francisco, so I came to the West Coast a lot growing up. And
my dad's from
here.
California, from Gardena.
So we both have family connections to the West Coast. Maybe we're overemphasizing how weird we feel when we're here.
We're just also hyper aware because that's what we do. Yeah.
It is a culture shock.
Yeah.
I remember talking to a lot of people who came from farming communities when they were sent to the camps, and growing up in mostly white, Western but interior farming communities, and literally them telling me it felt like I was in an alien planet because I'd never seen so many Japanese people in my life. That's sort of how we feel sometimes, I think. but we like it.
Yeah, we do.
It's positive.
We do.
It's good to fit in.
Good food.
Yeah.
So how far along on your project or at Brown University at math? Are you going for your master's or?
PhDs.
Oh, PhD
Yeah.
in what?
American studies. American studies, so like kind of history, literature stuff.
You don't know exactly what it is.
No, no, we don't really. I don't think anyone does.
Yeah, it's a combination kind of American history, literature, ethnic studies, music, art,
Yeah.
kind of anything you want to make it.
For the people who
It's the
can't
beauty
get
of
into
American
history
studies.
departments.
Yeah. Or who want to write songs for their dissertation.
And so Erin's going to go back to coursework. She's second year, and I'm a fourth year student, so I'm finishing up at Brown. Yeah. So, yeah. Maybe one more question? Or two more, sorry.
Yeah, that's been an ongoing fine-tuning process, I would say. We do a lot of workshops with teachers, which has been wonderful because we basically do this show and then say, like, what did this make you think about? And, like, you know your students, so think about ways to sort of incorporate this. Let us know if we can make things that you can use. When we do shows for high schoolers and middle schoolers, it's definitely more of a battle, I think, because they have to be there. Like, you all kind of chose to be here, maybe. But so, yeah, it can be tough. But basically what we've realized works best is doing basically a version of this show. We talk a lot more. We kind of go through some of the history a lot more. But really what we're trying to get across is the sense of, like, this counts as history, your family story counts as history. If you have grandparents still around, go home and ask them these questions. Use the internet. The internet is an incredible archive and resource now that anyone has access to so much. And so really, like, thinking about just broadening what we think of as history. And, you know, I think for some kids it's really meaningful to see music and to see the ways that we're telling stories through songs. Some kids are really moved by seeing these kinds of images. Maybe they're Asian American in, you know, communities like where we grew up where there aren't a lot of Asian American folks. But it's also for some of these kids, like, I don't know if they take anything in. Maybe there's something that sticks and, like, 5 years from now they'll come back to. But we're just sort of going for overall impression, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, like if a kid Googles, like, Cambodia or Khmer Rouge, like, that's a big win.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you all have hopefully can be moved by our art, but we don't expect that of high schoolers, and it means a lot when the, like, dozen of them out of the 400 person auditorium comes up and says, "Oh, cool, thanks."
We have a lot of Instagram followers now, though, that are high schoolers, which is fun, but also, like, hopefully, you know, we post some educational things sometimes, some stories, some archival photographs, so those little ways in, I think, those count for something. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is my academic path. You're just watching my dissertation. And that's kind of the point of it, is to sort of make that intervention to say, we need to stop treating these dissertations, we need to stop handicapping these brilliant PhD students who are doing this incredible work, who aren't sharing it with anyone, who are writing these super dense dissertations that basically bow down to this, like, system of citation and job markets and all this kind of stuff, and make work that actually can go out. You know, I don't want anyone to start writing songs, because unless you're a good songwriter, it'll probably be terrible. But just even things like making films or podcasts or just creative writing, whatever it is, whatever kind of personal talents or geniuses these people have, I mean, that's part of it. So I am very focused on my academic career, but this is it. And I'm not going to, like, I might apply for jobs in academia, but it would only be if I can do this kind of work. I mean, because we're not going to starve. We're very lucky, you know, with our backgrounds and our education, and we can get jobs teaching high school or play music or whatever, but it's sort of, we're trying to make it more of one and the same. We are very focused on academia. We take our research really seriously, and hopefully it shows in the songs and the visuals and stuff, but it's definitely not an either-or thing.
Yeah, I think, I don't know what my dissertation will look like, but Julian's going to come back and help me with it when I get there. No, but I think for both of us, we're not so sure about the academic path necessarily, I came into grad school already with kind of that sense of not being so sure if academia was the path for me, but on this tour, I think we've seen there are so many ways to teach, and there are so many ways to use the knowledge that we've been really lucky enough to just have time to think through. And so I think both of us sort of go day by day, but stay really open to a lot of these different opportunities. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll stick around.
Yeah, we'll be over
But-
at the merch table.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you to JANM and
Yeah.
Cortland for having us here, and thanks for coming.
This was a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.